Remember when we were naive enough to think that access to the world's information would free us instead of flatten us? It's long been an idea that if we have access to information and if we can get access to places that we haven't previously had, things that were institutionalized or very academic, that we would suddenly have this collective awakening where, we learn a lot more and we can understand the ways in which we've been manipulated, and this would be ultimately good for society. So yeah, lots of thinkers have always stressed the importance of having free access to information. But what's happened instead, it feels like, is that we've drowned it under the information. I think there's two ways that you can starve a mind, which is either deprive it of all information or overload it with information. And that's the space that I think the online space tends to be in. At one time, the internet was a safe refuge from the world. And now the world feels like a safe refuge from the internet. And by that, I mean, I remember when the internet was populated by the outsiders, and by the outsiders, I don't necessarily mean by minorities. I mean by people who had different ideas, people who felt alienated, people who felt alone. And it was very much a space where oddballs would come and feel a sense of togetherness, or even if it wasn't a sense of togetherness, your weirdness wouldn't be judged online. The fact that you were different, odd, or had different opinions and things like that, this would be a space where you could get away with all of that. Where now that, we all have access to the internet and it's been politicized heavily by many people, and it focuses on a lot of our differences. What I should say is, when you're online, there's this real feeling as if everything is crazy, everybody is mad. And when you come offline, these ideas don't really exist. I can always tell when I'm speaking to someone who spends a lot of time from Twitter, from the language that they use. And so, yeah, every now and then you need to come offline to feel a sense of sanity. Extremes do really well on the digital space. So if you have an extremely bigoted view, it's undoubtable that you will have a large following who will back you up at every turn. But also, if you exist on the extreme side of progression, or what is commonly considered progression, you will also have a major following, and you will be encouraged to keep going in that direction as your following increases. So what that does is it influences us to not change our minds, because if we change our minds, then we stand to lose some of our following, or we could be called a traitor. And I think it's much more compelling for people to keep growing their following, even if they are talking about things they don't necessarily believe anymore. So yeah, attention is as a major thing about why platforms, particularly like Twitter, do well. Because if you think about it, you could make private discussion groups. I'm part of one of those. And there's people from the left, there's people from the right, there's centrists, and all kinds of topics get discussed. It's called fair game. But it's a closed group. And I thought to myself, when I was seeing civil conversations take place, which is almost a thing of the past, I was thinking, why don't more people do this? And then it dawned on me, they don't do this because there's no attention there. Your ideas are not going to get retweeted, or they're not going to be picked up by a potential magazine. So yes, attention is maybe the strongest currency at the moment. Yes, I think, whenever a tragedy happens, a global issue, or something political, a political travesty, you often see people come in with the exact same points. Someone will say something that's been largely retweeted, and then everybody runs to that opinion because people in their network may not have seen that tweet. So it will still garner the same amount of attention. And so what this does is it encourages us to hand over our thinking to pundits instead of thinking about these issues that are happening for ourselves. And so then everybody has the same opinion, and anything that differs from that opinion is seen to be a threat, as opposed to an example of thinking for yourself. Every time I talk to someone who doesn't use Twitter about some outrage that's going on Twitter, I'm never not embarrassed by how petty it seems when you take it away from the digital space. And to the people that you're speaking to, this seems completely childish. It seems nonsensical, unimportant. And on Twitter, and in other spaces quite like Twitter, you know, these things are a matter of urgency. They're life and death, actually, for a lot of people. But no, the problem is, I think a lot of people who use social media in a politicized way fail to remember that most of the world does not. You know, a lot of the world who use social media, whether it be Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, are just posting about their holiday, the night out they went on, who just got married, their boyfriends, girlfriends. You know, it's only a loud minority of people who use it to kind of, fuel their own interests or political agendas. Yeah, I would often say that Twitter and the general public are quite distinct. I mean, a lot of people don't know words that are popularized online, be it emotional labor, be it cisgendered. You know, there's a lot of online jargon. And a lot of people who don't exist solely on the internet don't know that. But the problem, or maybe what I think is dangerous, or at least should be thought about, is the fact that what is now happening on Twitter bleeds into, you know, into the real world via journalism. And it does that because journalists and a lot of pundits are more compelled, it seems, to go with what's popular rather than what's critical. But yeah, I think it's easier to brand a lot of things as hate because then you don't have to engage with the idea. And if you brand it hate, then you will get a mob that will join you in that. I think a lot of ideas that are confronting, I think it's the most confronting ideas actually that are worth digesting. I think the benefit of the internet is that we can be challenged. You know, I often seek out ideas that could shift my perspective. And also, not everything that is uncomfortable is untrue. Not everything that is offensive is a lie. I think when we're thinking about offense, there's a difference between slurs. You know, there are obvious slurs that I don't think I need to break down, and ideas that offend. And yeah, I don't think every offensive idea is without merit. Offense is often based on your feelings. So if you are fixed on a certain idea and I say, well, actually, I don't see it in that way. I think you could look at it from this perspective. That could be seen as offensive because that could be branded to some person as erasing your experience. And so, yeah, I think it's, like I said, I think extremes do very well online. And so, yeah, it's much easier to call things hate. And I think what we do there is we really silence a lot of people, and not just people that we consider to be fascists. I think we even silence a lot of people that we may consider the most vulnerable. This is a term that gets bandied about online a lot. Often people want to amplify the voice of the marginalized or the voice of the oppressed. But not all oppressed people think the same. Not all marginalized people think the same. And what we do when we call dissenting opinions hate is we take away their want, desire to talk. Because, you know, getting hit by an online mob is scary. It's dispiriting. It can be depressing. It can make you want to come offline completely. It's embarrassing, shameful, humiliating. And these are all feelings that everybody tries to escape. People are rarely as hostile in real life as they are online because real life has real consequences. For instance, if you brand anyone with a slur, you may find yourself in a physical altercation. But also in real life, there's no one to applaud your intolerance. There's no one to applaud you thinking in a monochromatic way. It's not as easy to be exalted for ideas that are rigid in real life. And you don't get that immediate sense of gratification that you do online, that thing that we're all addicted to, that dopamine rush by a like or a retweet, is not there online. You know, you have to read people's body language. It's all a much more complex interaction. So yes, I think these are the reasons why people are not as hostile in real life as they are online. And this is, again, the danger, because if you live your life online, you come away with this idea that hostility is everywhere. It's all around you. And that can terribly cloud your worldview, and making you descend into something quite negative. We do need to get out more, definitely. I think even as far as activism is concerned, I think the people who probably need help the most, or the people who find themselves in vulnerable situations, the people who can't even communicate online, the people who don't understand this language, because online there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of new terms emerging every day, there are new ways to identify every day, and this can often alienate people who don't have a certain level of education, who haven't studied gender studies, who aren't on, in feminist texts or the rest of it. So yeah, I think we do need to spend a lot more time offline. And this is the way that your movements don't get co-opted by corporate forces, which essentially make them just a marketing tool, or just empty. I think a lot of well-intended movements have become quite empty. I think there are a lot of women who believe in equality of the sexes, equality of the genders, who are resistant to use the term feminism. I think it's a word that's become increasingly, for a lot of people, unusable. And I think it's become unusable because it means so many different things to people. For some people, it might be selfie culture. For some people, feminism is the choice to do whatever you want. And there are a lot of feminists who see it as the complete opposite. And so because the word is so ambiguous now, I think a lot of people are finding it harder and harder to identify with things that they would have once really rooted their identities in. I think we should get out more if we hope to really help vulnerable people, or people who haven't had the chance to have the education that we have. I think we undermine the fact that these are actually quite privileged conversations. They come from the universities, they come from reading, and there are a lot of people who don't have that at their disposal. As far as diversity and representation goes, I think they've become buzzwords, and I get why. I think, a corporation's first initiative is to sell. And if we are telling them how best to sell to us, then they will follow. You can have a market for people who are anti-market. It can sell anything back to you. But what we do is we feed corporations people that we think don't have our best interests. We give them the tools to best manipulate our minds to buy products that are unethical. And in this sense, the initiative for diversity becomes very muddied, And for me, diversity isn't just about having a range of different body types or a range of different faces. It is also about having a diverse representation of ideas. When you speak to Black and brown people and other minorities, again, who don't live online, this is not their experience of the world most of the time, which doesn't mean to discount that racism or prejudice. I think anybody who exists as another has felt these things at certain points. But whether they would go about trying to remedy these things in the way that the online narrative suggests is quite different. So I think for a lot of people, diversity initiatives can be quite patronizing. They don't represent everybody, they represent a loud minority. There are many forms of supposed liberation that I think are disempowerment in the way that we teach people to be constantly on guard. We teach people that everybody is inherently out to get you who doesn't look like you. We teach people that empowerment is in fragility. And for me, there's a difference between sensitivity and fragility. Sensitivity is a beautiful thing. I will always be pro-sensitivity. Sensitivity is the want to understand people. I think things become a lot less scary when you understand them. Fragility is something else. Fragility is quite reactionary. Fragility is that thing that makes you center yourself in every conversation. Fragility is what makes us believe that our experiences must be represented in everybody else's. Fragility makes us not be able to relate to something that doesn't look like us. And that exists on all kinds of sides. You know, there are people with racial supremacist ideas who don't feel there is anything to gain from people who don't look like them. And in this sense, this is why privilege is a very tricky conversation for me, because anything that disallows you to see how other people are living is a disadvantage to me. It's not something that I would consider a privilege personally, although I understand why the term is used. Privilege to me is the ability to see beyond yourself. And that's something that money doesn't easily buy. It's something that white privilege, I will use in quotes because I'm cautious about a lot of online terms, but it's something that white privilege doesn't buy you either. And in that sense, it's a disadvantage to me. Privilege is the understanding that everybody is suffering. And I say that's a privilege because when you understand that, everybody is suffering, irrespective of their social status, you learn something. I think you learn to take yourself less seriously to some degree. I think you learn that money is not a fix-all. I think you learn that race is not a fix-all. I think you learn also that race and identity, gender and sexuality is not a measure of character. There is something to me in being able to think beyond your identity that I think is very useful on all sides. And it's not something that I see much across political spectrums. It's there in small doses, but it's not very loud. And again, that's because extremes do well. So anything objective, if you live through a subjective lens, will seem like a threat. If you are objective on issues that are very contentious, let's say about race, gender and class and things like that, you know, you might be seen to be siding with the oppressor. You know, you're meant to pick a side. Time is a luxury to me. And in the Western parts of the world, more than a lot of, you know, the wider world, you know, time is something, at least for me, that I think is a major benefit. You know, to wake up and, you know, to do what I do, you know, specifically, you know, which is a mix of writing and styling and speaking. Yeah, because I think what happens with a lot of people is that they're always filling up their lives with other people's lives, whether that's via social media, whether that's by the news, whether that's by all types of, you know, different things that life admin requires of us, is they don't get a lot of time to think. And I think when you do have time to think and time to reflect, your ideas often shift. And so for me, time is a major benefit. I think in our society, we really celebrate what it is to be busy, you know, and I don't actually like being busy. I like to be steady, because when I'm busy, that means a lot of my energy is on projects that are outside of me, or maybe not, they can even be projects for me, but I prefer to have that in a steady progression, because you know, as much as I can enjoy a lot of the work that I do, but I don't think my life is solely about work or solely about a career. So time is a wonderful, wonderful gift. Time can definitely be a double-edged sword. And like most things in life, I'm learning you have to approach things in moderation. Because you can have enough time to think yourself into a hole, and I have definitely been there. And time can often make you confront, you know, the worst parts of you. And I think that's something we try to escape in society. I think we undermine how easy it is for us to become the people that we dislike. I think we are unaware of the feelings that create the people that we dislike, the forces that we call oppression, you know, it is often a sense of lack. It is the idea that our identities are under threat. It is many of those things. And so with time, you see, or at least I have seen, how with a different circumstance, a different upbringing, a different culture, a different religion, I'm not religious, but, potentially with a different religion, and especially a fundamentalist belief in a religion, how I could easily become a lot of the things that I dislike or find harmful. And it's because of my own propensity to become those things with different circumstances that I try to take time. I'm hesitant about labeling things evil. I'm hesitant not because I don't think people can be ill-intended. I think that would be naive. But I'm much more interested in the root causes as opposed to the symptoms. The idea that's pervasive online is that to be a good person is to believe certain things. I think this is the cornerstone of allyship. Again, another term that I'm cautious about. I understand allyship, but I may be more inclined to go with the word solidarity, because allyship has this insidious way of suggesting that your experiences must be my beliefs. Whereas solidarity is like, I see what you're going through and I care, I have passion and I understand. And I will stand with you or contest anybody who inflicts violent thinking onto such groups. But it doesn't mean that your experiences have to colour everything that I believe. And allyship seems to do that for me. And not always, of course, like there are exceptions to every rule, but it just seems that more and more that's the way it's going. Cancel culture, I think, is complex. I mean, it's complex because humans are complex, and that's something we like to negate online. When we can't see complexity, it's because we probably doubt it within ourselves. But we all are not this 2D vision. And so the thing about cancel culture is, I think it's maybe more interesting to look at why people abuse power. How do we get to this state where people think that, let's say, sex is an entitlement for them, or corruption is a rite of passage? I think people abuse power because we attribute it so easily to people. I think we treat people with fame and money like they are inherently different. And sadly, because the human is flawed, the human is insecure and needs all this wells of validation, they believe it. I think humans believe their own hype, and this is the hype that audience perpetuate. And so I do believe that if you have committed a crime, a violent crime, a sexual crime, you should pay those consequences. Do I think that people can't change? No. I know a lot of people don't change, but I would never suggest that people can't change. They often do. I have. Many people I know have. And especially when you're met with some of the toughest adversity, I think that's a great mirror for change. So I think, I personally, to be honest, never had to cancel anyone, because I guess I don't also idolize anyone or believe that anybody is without flaw. I mean, I listen to a lot of music, I read a lot of writers, but my interest in them doesn't make them seem superior to me. It doesn't negate the fact that they could be harmful people in their private life. And I think if we stop treating talent as if it's if we stop treating talent like it's synonymous with character or synonymous with good intent, I think we'll be a lot less disappointed in entertainers and some of our favorite people. I think as far as cancelling people for old tweets, things that they said last year, potentially even things that they said last week, I think we should not undermine how quickly people can change their ideas. I know online it seems that people don't change their ideas because they are encouraged not to, because they have an audience, and some of them are funded. Some of them are getting magazine deals or journalistic opportunities to hold a certain opinion. But our ideas can change quite quickly. And so to cancel people for tweets that they made years ago, I think it's just to lie to yourself. I think people have ideas that we would call problematic just even from their belief systems. I think if everybody was to act as though they've never said something homophobic, especially if you've ever grown up in a strongly religious family, I think you could be telling porkies. You know, I think if anybody has said that they've never questioned what it means to be transgender and whether that's morally correct or not, I think someone would be lying to themselves. I think everything that is new is often questioned, not understood, feared. So I don't think you can cancel people for old tweets because we are learning constantly. I mean, I'm learning constantly. I occupy, or I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community. However, there are identities and genders that I'm unaware of, and I'm learning every day. So I think to cancel people for old tweets is, I think it's quite pompous. I think it's quite, I think it lacks a certain self-examination that I think is crucial. And I think it's just unhealthy. I think it's unhealthy in a place where we talk so much about mental health and how important it is and how we have to remember that mental health is just as important as physical health, and then to discard people at the first sign of something we dislike. I don't know, the two don't marry very well to me. So yeah, again, I'm not going to cancel someone for things that they've done that I find that I dislike or that I disagree with. I disagree with most things, to be fair. There are a few things that I disagree with that I see, especially right now. But does that mean that we can't have some common understanding? Does that mean that you're always unkind? Does that mean that you can't be generous? Does that mean that you're not a good listener? No. Changing your mind does confirm that you are still thinking. To some extent, you know, if you can look back on yourself 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, or maybe even a year, and slightly cringe, you know, without hating yourself, I think you were moving in the right direction. I think part of the beauty of living is that we get to change our minds, is that we get to update our beliefs, we get to challenge ourselves, we get to confront ourselves, and hopefully that brings a further understanding of who we are and who we are in relation to other people and how we are similar. So yes, I think, you know, people, for me, who don't change their mind, I find quite scary. I may not use the word problematic. Again, I just try to refrain from a lot of online terminology. But I think it's scary because it means that you're quite rigid and fixed. And people who have rigid ideas, you know, can often go on to do and commit some of the most heinous atrocities. So yes, I think changing your mind is a productive sign of thinking. I would say that it's easier to condemn people than ideas, because if we were to condemn ideas, we would see how those ideas have affected us at one point. We would see how those ideas are embedded in structures that we still defend. I think a lot of problematic ideas can come from certain fundamentalist religious beliefs. And, you know, I don't condemn religion. I'm not naive to the problems it brings. But because many of us who are in activist spaces or political spaces are religious, I think there can be a want to shy away from how certain ideas can form in people, whether they're homophobic ideas, racist tendencies, you know, even cultures that are populated of black and brown minorities can have prejudices against complexion and shades of skin or against tribes and things like that. These ideas, or no one has a monopoly on toxic ideas. They kind of exist in all cultures. But if we were to acknowledge that, then we would have to look at ourselves. We'd have to look at some of the beliefs that we still hold. We'd have to be able to critique the cultures, the movements, the political parties that we come from. And not many people find that easy to do. But I really believe that if you care for something and if you love something, then you should be able to critique those ideas, because you want to see it flourish. You want it to be the best that it can be. I critique the things that I care the most about. Not because I hate them. There is nothing really that I hate. There are just things that I try to understand. There's things that I disagree with. So I think confronting ideas is just a lot more confrontational for the individual. So it's just easy to blame people. If your advocacy or activism is motivated by the fear of being cancelled, then you will adopt the popular belief. And if we look back in history, popular ideas have often been ones that have been incredibly harmful. And so as long as you're worried about being cancelled, and I understand the fear, you know, like I said, mob culture is very terrifying. What that can do to your mind and your esteem is horrible. But I think if you are committed to trying to make the world a better place, or your community a better place, your society, your culture, I think you have to be prepared to think for yourself. I think you must be hesitant before you adopt the language of the time. I mean, and that's not to say that you should be, that you should not respect people who may wish to identify in a certain way. But I think you should never stop thinking because of someone else's experience, because someone's experience does not speak for everybody else. It's a personal truth rather than a truth. And so, yeah, I think if you're motivated by the fear of being cancelled, you will always lie to yourself, because there are popular ideas that do well. And just because it's popular doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's good, doesn't even mean it's doesn't even mean it has any depth to them. They're just easy to say. I would definitely say that when I meet people who I consider bright, who are not afraid to say they don't know, they're not afraid to say, I need to think about that. They're not afraid to say, I haven't formed an opinion on that yet. Can I come back to you? I think these are some of the most intelligent people that I meet, because I think a lot of awareness is understanding how much you don't know. You could build a universe on what I don't know. And I'm always learning, and a lot of my beliefs and ideas are constantly being shattered. And I really welcome it, because I think if you are someone who wants to be honest, you know, I don't know about an objective truth, but at least if you're someone who's seeking a deeper understanding, you welcome being wrong. It's a pleasure to be wrong, because when you are wrong, you are closer to being right. People who are scared to be wrong, I think, are the people who are a lot more rigid in their ideas. They're people who want to protect a belief system, and a belief system can often be a delusion. And so a lot of people are comfortable in their delusions. But yeah, I think maybe the first sign of knowing anything is knowing you know nothing at all. Yeah, I think it's very easy when you have a big following or a lot of likes to think everything you say is gold, and to believe in your own hype. Humility is a very productive thing for thinking. And I think all of these conversations are about thoughts, they're about ideas, you know. Crucial to them all is the ability to think well. And humility will always allow you to think well, because you don't need to be right in a conversation. You don't have to be the loudest person in a conversation. You don't even have to offer an opinion to every conversation. When you lack humility, you feel you need to do all of these things. So humility will get you closer probably to the answers that you are seeking. So I think we should all be a little more humble, and we should always remember that just because something is popular, it doesn't make it good. There's a lot of things that are popular that are not good. There are a lot of things in history that have been popular that are not good. Sometimes popularity is just a measure of how much people aren't thinking. Privilege for me is a double-edged sword, because for every privilege, there's a disadvantage. So even if we think about something like beauty, online there are a lot of conversations about people with a beauty privilege. And I think this is interesting because yes, beauty and conventional good looks can maybe land you a job, and it can get you access into places that you may not have had access before. But you are also more prone to objectification. You're also more prone to people relinquishing all of your thoughts to solely concentrate on how you look, which I don't think would feel like a privilege to anybody who has some integrity or self-worth beyond how they look. When it comes to a lot of racial privileges, privilege can put you in a bubble. So because you are privileged and you've always, had a silver spoon in your mouth, so to speak, you find it very hard to understand how other people are living, or how people end up in vulnerable situations. This is a disadvantage to your own thinking. This is not, to me, at least a privilege that I would seek. So privilege for me can very much be a disadvantage, because privileges protect us from things. Privileges can put us in a bubble. And at least for me, the goal in life is to burst as many of my own bubbles as possible. So in this way, I think privilege can be a disadvantage. Even when I think about, certain things that happen in the Black community, there are examples of what people call light skin privilege. And again, I think if you are someone with integrity, to be sought out solely for your complexion is dehumanizing. To only see the value in someone because of their hair texture, or because of how they look, or the children that you might make together, this is demoralizing and dehumanizing for anybody who sees themselves beyond how they look. This will feel like a disadvantage to that person, because this person will never know if someone is interested in them for who they are or how they look. Equally with money. Money, of course, brings so many privileges, but then you can't trust who's around you. You can't trust who is a true friend, or who is really loyal. You can't understand if people are being honest with you because they have something to gain from you. And this can make someone very paranoid. Or this should be evident in the fact that we see a lot of people with money and fame, success, commit suicide or check into mental homes and things like this. We should be able to understand that, privilege isn't the be all and end all. It isn't everything it's cracked up to be. Which is why I'm hesitant about using the term privilege to describe people. Because, it's a double-edged sword. Privilege, more than anything, is a reflection of your own values. So if you see someone who is conventionally good-looking as solely privileged, I would deduct from that it's because you value beauty. But if you're a little bit more layered in how you understand the world, then I think you can also see how it's a major disadvantage. I haven't grown up with everything, which doesn't mean that I've grown up dirt poor. I haven't. But I haven't grown up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I haven't grown up with the learning capabilities of my peers. I am dyslexic, and have ADHD and, show strong signs of being on the spectrum, which affects my ability to see things in the way that other people do. It affects my ability to socialize in the way that other people do, or find the same things fun. But these things that have made me stand out, at least to myself, or not fit in, which can sometimes, or at least when I was younger, can feel very hurtful. It's very hurtful when you're young to not fit in, to not mesh with the group. But for all of my learning, so-called disadvantages, they've been great advantages in terms of the hyper-focus it's given me on things that I truly care about, or the ability to see things from a different perspective, the unwillingness to believe before I think about things, and the ability to sit with myself and be quite comfortable for longer periods than most find comfortable. And so I think also, yeah, in a lot of disadvantages, you know, there are privileges too. The thing about life, I think, that we really negate online is that it's really varying shades of grey. You know, it's not this black and white thing that we all think it is. My disadvantages in terms of how I think and my so-called learning disabilities when I was young have really given me a certain hyper-focus. They've given me a passion for people who have learning differences. Those are people that really mean a lot to me. Those are people whose books and writings I'm very much interested in, because I know what it's like to feel a sense of isolation in your ideas. I don't look at life as this chase for perpetual happiness. I look at it as wholeness, you know, and feeling all emotions in their totality. And they all have something to teach and something that can bring profound lessons and gifts. So yeah, I do think a lot of my disadvantages have been a privilege. You know, I like that I've not had the easiest life, because it makes me a lot more willing to understand other people. I think you can often tell people who've been through hell, whether it's a personal hell or an external hell, for how willing they are to understand people. I think it's important to not to wallow in pain, but I think there is power in pain in terms of what you do with it. I think it's very easy to indulge in your sadness as opposed to extract from your sadness. I think it's easy to see your victimhood as a virtue. I think it's easy to think of people who have been victimized as morally superior than those who may not have been, in at least the ways that we understand. But yes, I think there's a lot you can do with pain. I think a lot of artists have done and continue to do, and probably always will do. So yeah, there is a power from pain. You have choices when you have pain. You can succumb to it and go under. You can learn from it, or you can use it to see that, oh, maybe other people have this too. Maybe this should affect how I approach people and talk to people. Maybe I should learn more about people before I judge them. I think it's important that we turn negatives into positives, because negatives will always be around. I don't think the utopia that we're looking for will ever exist, because people exist and people go through things and they are flawed. So if we can turn negatives into positives, which is essentially to broaden our perspectives, I don't think we'll have to be so crippled by our pain. I don't think our pain should have to shut us off from the world or to make us feel entitled to something. Yeah, I think we have to turn every negative into a positive and see what we can learn from the situation, because suffering and pain is written into the small print of life. Maybe the beauty of the analog world is that people got to make their mistakes in private, but it doesn't mean they didn't make them. I think even if we look into the lives of some of the most prolific activists and thinkers, you know, we're going to find chaos. And that's not necessarily because they're hypocrites. I don't think so at all. I think it's because they're human. So mistakes are how we find ourselves, you know, it's how we learn. And I think there's something on the internet that encourages us to see the world as, you know, a fight between good and evil. And it's not that. I think we're a combination of it all of us. So yeah, I think we should be a bit more forgiving on people's mistakes. I think we should be slower to judge, but we can think still. I think critique is fair. Humiliation, that's another territory that I don't think is the most productive. I mean, people are welcome to it, but I don't think you can humiliate someone into changing their beliefs. I don't think you can shame someone into changing their beliefs. I think what they do is confirm them. And sometimes, sadly, I think as we see playing out a lot in the world now, it leads to violent motivation. But yeah, you can't humiliate, shame someone, guilt someone into believing what you do. And if you can shame someone into believing what you believe, it's inherently condescending. I only know and tweet or write about things because I'm aware of my own mistakes. You know, a lot of what I'm writing about and thinking about comes from acknowledging my own mistakes and why I made them and what was underneath them. And if I didn't have that awareness, you know, I would continue to make them and make my life and potentially other people's lives hell. So we have to make mistakes, you know. Life is trial and error. And even, you know, some of the most vulnerable people that we think about, they're not without mistake. You know, they're not without flaws. And if we find out about their flaws, do they not become vulnerable anymore? Do we not want to help them now? Because, I don't know, someone in a very destitute position said something homophobic once, you know, is he cancelled? I'm not sure. I think if we view the world in that way, like, we can only be with ourselves. And I think that's a really detached, unhelpful way to live. You know, I'm working as a stylist, you know, that means I'm often around people who some would consider elite, you know, people who have benefits other people don't have, access that other people don't have, money that other people don't have. And what I notice from those spaces that I've occupied is no one, no matter how successful I've come to find some people to be, at least in my perception and a lot of the world's perception, ever feels like they've made it. You know, there is always the chase for more. I think, you know, I think Bob Marley had a quote, and I wish I could quote it properly, but I think the essence of what he was saying is, as long as numbers are your measure of success, there is no end destination, in that numbers go on forever. So people will find themselves constantly chasing their tail and never feeling like that void is ever filled, because you can't fill it with stuff. Or at least this is what I've come to learn myself, and that you do actually fill it in how much you can be of service to other people. You know, it's a very simple thing, like you give something to someone else, you feel good about it. You know, you feel good seeing them smile. It does something to you that, I don't know, buying a new pair of shoes doesn't, or at least it wears off quickly when you do it for yourself. So I think it is actually being in service to one another. I wouldn't consider myself an activist, but the things that I care about because I think those are the only things that truly do bring fulfillment. Is working out how we can better assist each other. So yeah, I think that is the case for less is more. I think we have all sorts of examples constantly every day that less is more, but we just don't listen or look properly. To require a little for contentment, I believe to be a privilege, because it's not something many people can do. I'm not even sure if I can always do it. I think it's something I aspire to, because we live in a world where we're always encouraged to believe that we need more. We're always encouraged to believe that we are lesser without the acquisition of something else. And so to be able to tune out and plug out from that and be content with what you have, so long as you have enough for a life, you know, and by that I mean shelter, food, you know, water, all of the basics in a comfortable setting. To be okay with that, because there are so few people who are okay with that, to me must be a privilege, because it's rare. It's a rare thing to feel contentment. So I think contentment and not having to compete is a privilege. Yes, I do think that the search for one-upmanship that happens online, you know, people try to out-woke each other a lot of the time. And I do think this strips us of basic fundamentals to humans, such as empathy. Empathy almost is a slur to some people. Empathy is seen as a contentious term. in the sense that I think people think when you ask for empathy or you require empathy or you ask people to approach situations with empathy that you're asking them to be a doormat. And that's not it. Empathy is quite hard. If empathy was easy, we'd all have it. It's much easier to be aggressive. It's much easier to be argumentative, defensive. These things are almost natural. To be empathetic is to really take a lot more time, is to really challenge yourself. It's hard work. And anything worth doing is hard work a lot of the time. So in wanting to outwoke each other, outsmart each other, and just feel superior to one another, we're only cheating ourselves, because we go to bed with ourselves each night and we truly know how we feel, and we know it doesn't really work. So for me, as much as I can often find myself alone, I often feel a lot better going to bed at night, and I sleep pretty easy, because the person I am out there and the person that I go to bed with, there isn't much of a distance between the two. And I think when you are living a double life, I think it's a lot harder to sleep. I think you stay awake with your thoughts a lot more so. And I think, the internet does encourage us to live this double life. And I think I get it. I think, at the center, we all want belonging and acceptance. So it makes sense to go with the dominant discourse, the dominant ideology without thinking. People have done it over and over in history because the alternative is a lot harder. The alternative means that you won't be easily liked. So it's a hard path to walk. But I think it's ultimately the best path to walk because you're in alignment with yourself a lot more, and to move through life and not without the aim to be likable, but to be honest and kind, I think is bold. One of the biggest political heartbreaks for me is that the notion of free speech is seen as an extremist right-wing view. And I can't think of anything, more disheartening, in the sense that if we look at a lot of movements in history, and even if we think of two really popular examples of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, completely opposed in how they sought to remedy the issues of racism. But they were both allowed to exist. Those extremely different views were both allowed to exist at the same time. Whereas there aren't many different views that are allowed to exist at the same time anymore. And that's a tragedy. And in thinking that we are amplifying the voice of the marginalized or the voice of the most vulnerable, we're not. We're amplifying a certain ideology that many people do not share. There are many ways to skin a cat, as the saying goes, and there are many ways to approach one problem. And to think that, there is only one way to do it is the height of arrogance. And also, I think we've got to this space where we believe that free speech is a threat, is because we now view language to be violent. And I understand that there are things that you can say that can maybe delegitimize people's experiences. But I think we should be careful about calling language violent, because if language is violence, what's actual violence? Does that get a new name? I think we should be careful about calling language violent, because even if we suppress these ideas, they don't disappear. They embolden away from public view, which is arguably a lot scarier. So because we consider language to be violent, and this I believe is a symptom of not sensitivity. This is where I think we border on fragility. Because we see language as synonymous with violence, free speech and a diversity of ideas and opinions is suddenly a threat. And maybe there's this inherent belief somewhere that our lives are supposed to be comfortable, and because we think our lives are supposed to be comfortable and that we should feel a state of bliss at all times. Anything that doesn't give us that feeling is considered the opposition or considered the threat. And this is how we've allowed freedom of speech to become a concern for right-wing pundits, and that's a real shame. Probably one of the biggest shames, I would say, out of this whole online discourse. I think we need to have free speech. I think we need to be robust in our characters. I think we need to be sensitive without being fragile. And we shouldn't discount everything that we disagree with, because you're silencing a lot of marginalized people. You know, a lot of marginalized people speak out about things and they're called a traitor, or they're called a coon, they're called, a sellout. You know, these are really troublesome ideas, because what they do is they suggest that there is an authentic way to be black, to be gay, to be a lesbian, to be transgender. And I don't think anyone truly wants their identity to be so boxed in. I think it's patronizing. And I think anybody who is really thinking about these ideas feels quite patronized by them. So yeah, we need free speech because we need a range of ideas to attack the issues that currently face us.